So when you're working with a large graph, some of your nodes are going to end up looking like they have a lot of branches coming out of them. And sometimes these can stack one on top of the other. And that would really make your graph large and complex. Now, one of the ways to simplify this is to use a data table. And that data table can essentially allow you to replace multi-step complex criteria with a single CSV. And then LeanData will read that CSV in a single node. So what I've done here is you just have a normal graph, and near the bottom, there is a region branch node that splits things between APAC and EMEA, and what would be NAM. Now, EMEA and APAC are simply going to round robin pools, but North America is a little bit more complicated. So what we want to do is build out a data table that will take a look at not only the country field, but it will also take a look at the industry field and then also the number of employees. In addition to that, we want to assign not only the owner of the lead based on these criteria, we also want to stamp, let's say, the description field with the reason why we decided to assign the record the way that we did. And we can do all of that with a single data table. A data table is useful for taking in multiple inputs and then also being able to affect multiple outputs as well. So let's go ahead and do this. First, we need to create a data table before we can reference it in our graph. So I'm going to jump over to our LeanData dashboard to routing, and then under routing, let's go all the way down here to data table management. And let's just set this up for, let's say, lead router. Now I've got a few samples here, but let's create one from scratch. So I'll create a data table, and you can see that I have a name here. So let's go ahead and enter NAM, and then version 1, NAM. And then for business unit, we'll just select a single graph. If you had multiple business units, you could do this for that, but we'll just do single graph. So on to step 2, you can see that there are 2 options. You can either create a data table directly for this in LeanData and start off this way, which if you have some very simple criteria, I would recommend doing it this way. But I suspect that most of you have an existing CSV and you just want to adapt that CSV to use in data tables. So we're going to go through this second option here. Now, I do highly recommend downloading a sample just to give you the foundational structure for what this CSV should look like. But if you want to build this out from scratch, that's totally fine too. So I'm going to jump over to a CSV that I have already adapted here. So there are a few things that I want to point out. You'll see that the first row is simply just the columns that I want. And then the second row is going to be a way to categorize this as either an input field or an output field. So this particular column is going to tell me how should I distribute or assign this record, or is it going to tell me which field should be populated with which values? So is it going to be an input or an output? Lastly, we need to know what data type this particular column represents, if it's text or if it's country, if it's a number or true false or an owner field or something like that. So those first 3 rows, these are going to be taken up by these particular pieces of data, these options. Now, what we can then do is input our actual criteria. Each row is going to represent a combination of criteria. Here I have tech, USA, less than 500, is active equals true. You may not have a field for that, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that to simplify things. And then we just have the user ID or round robin pool name for the intended owner. And then we have this other text value here as well that I want to input into our description field. So that's one row. Now just notice a few formatting conventions here. An asterisk means a wildcard. This denotes any string that ends with tech in this particular cell here. Okay, and you notice here in the employee count column, I have a less than sign, and I also have a greater than option. And we also support ranges as well here with just a hyphen. So you can input numerical values and input ranges by using less than, greater than, or hyphens. Now, at the very bottom here, you can see that a wildcard by itself just means that we're accepting any value in this particular field. All right, so here is our data table example. Your data table is likely going to be a lot more complicated than this, but you can add up to, I believe, 20 different columns, and you can have up to 50,000 rows. So there's a lot of room to run with this. Okay, so now that you understand the data table and how to format it, let's jump back over to LeanData, and let's go ahead and browse. And what we're going to do is pick the data table sample, and then click continue to step 3. And you can see here we have the column name, and we have either input or output, and then we have the data type. Okay, so if you want to add an additional column, you can do so here. And you just need to enter the name, whether it's an input or an output, and what data type it is. But I'm not actually going to do that for our example here. So we'll go ahead and save. And then once your data table is finished saving, let's go ahead and click done. And then it's going to look something like this. Now, you can make changes here if you need to. I'm not going to make any changes. And last thing I'm going to do, you'll notice that this is inactive. So let's go ahead and go to Actions. And let's go to View Versions. Okay, and Actions in this version 1 NAM. And then I'm going to click Activate. And that's going to activate this data table and make it available for use. So let's go ahead and jump back a page. Here you can see a few other actions you can take as well, including editing the data table, making available for use, viewing versions, things like that, and downloading it as well. And if you would rather edit in a CSV format, you can then replace it later on. Okay, so let's go back to our graph, and I am going to go over to the action selection in my node bar, and then to route. And then I'm going to go to data table at the very bottom here. And I'm going to connect my North America edge to this data table. Let's rename that to NAM data table, routes to NAM data table. And you need to input your mappings here. So which fields correspond to which fields in your actual Salesforce on the lead object, since this is lead router. So industry goes with industry, and then country goes with country, which makes sense. For employee count, I'll have to select the proper field here, and that will be under the routed lead and then the employees field. Okay, and then now we need to map the outputs. So what we mapped above were the inputs. Now what we need to do is do the same for the outputs for the fields that we actually want to update. So let's select the routed lead and then the owner, and then data table reasoning. I don't have that field in my Salesforce, so I'm going to go ahead and populate that in the description field on the routed lead instead. So I'll just use that text field for this purpose. Now you also have an additional selection here if you want to overwrite an existing value. Here we're just going to do only overwrite if blank. Actually, let's change that. Let's change that to always in both scenarios. So now we have the most up-to-date value that's particularly helpful for the owner field, right? Okay, additional options here for whether you or not you want someone to respect the schedule, and whether you want to send email notifications. But fallback edges, there's quite a lot of them here. So you can configure those as needed, but we'll just leave all the defaults for now. And then I'll go ahead and click done, and then I'll click save. And then once I'm ready, I can go ahead and deploy this. So that's a very simple example, but hopefully this will help you to at least get started with using data tables in your LeanData instance. Hope that helps.